Good afternoon, Pastor Stecker here with Grace Lutheran Church as we continue our Bible study here on Mere Christianity. Today we're looking at chapters 1, 2, and 3 of Book 3, calling it Christian Behavior. Happy Wednesday. We now move on to the third book in Mere Christianity, Christian Behavior. For those keeping track at home, in the first book, we covered how right and wrong are really clues to the meaning of the universe, where we settled on the fact that if we believe that right and wrong are real things, we must believe in the end that there is a God. In the second book, we looked at what Christians believe, showing the differences in belief from Christianity and other religions, ending that book with the fundamental belief about Jesus being God, who became man in order to redeem us rebels and calling us to now fight for the good side in this enemy-occupied world. Now, in this third book about Christian behavior, we will discuss what Christianity then teaches us about how we are to live our lives and why. In today's video, we will spend the majority of our time on chapter 1, where Lewis will discuss the purpose of God's rules or law, the three parts of morality, and how Christian understanding of morality will always go above and beyond the moral understanding of those who aren't Christians. Then we will move on to discuss the virtues in chapter 2 and how Christian ethics interacts and engages in the public sphere in chapter 3. Lewis begins by treating a common misconception about the purpose and form of God's rules or law. He uses the example of a schoolboy who was asked about what he thought of God. And he replied that as far as he could tell, God was the sort of person who is always snooping around to see if anyone is enjoying himself, and then trying to stop it. Now, this is the view that many have in mind when they hear about morality or religion. Basically, something that gets in the way of a good time. Gloomy, boring, stuffy, raining on the parade. But this point of view misses the boat. Lewis points out that moral rules are really like directions for running the human machine. Every moral rule is there to prevent a breakdown or a strain or friction in the proper running of that human machine. And that is why these rules seem to get in our way and interfere with our plans, because our natural inclinations are usually to do things which break down our machine and others. To put it another way, the reality is that every mistake causes trouble, either right away or down the road, in both our lives and often in the lives of those around us. The view that morality gets in the way of fun is no more sophisticated or wise than the child who gets upset that their mother has prevented them from the electric socket. So now that we've established that moral laws are put there in place for our own good, Lewis then goes an important step further. He defines three parts to understanding morality, pointing out that most people, Christians included, only understand the first one of these three parts. And this leads to practical issues in our lives and in our communities. Lewis begins by explaining the first and second parts by showing the two ways in which the human machine goes wrong. The first is when human individuals relate to each other in an unhealthy way. The second is when something on the inside of an individual goes wrong. Lewis uses a few illustrations to help us understand what he means. We can first get the idea in our heads by thinking of a fleet of ships sailing in the ocean together. The voyage will only be successful if first, the ships do not collide with each other or get in the way of each other. And secondly, if each ship is seaworthy and her engine is in good order. Because of course, if the ships keep having collisions, the voyage will not last very long. But on the other hand, if their steering gears and engines are not working properly, then they would never be able to avoid colliding with each other. Lewis then goes on to use a second example. You can think of humanity as a band playing a tune. To get a good result, you need two things. Each player's individual instruments must be in tune, and also each must come in at the right moment so as to combine properly with the other players. Once again, the instruments need to relate in the right way and also work properly themselves. And this is where Lewis brings in the third and final part of morality. We have not asked where the fleet is trying to go, or what music the band is trying to play. The instruments may be in tune and might all come in at the right moment, but even so, the performance would not be a success if they were supposed to play dance music and instead played a dirge. And however well the fleet sailed, it would be considered a failure if they were meant to reach Boston, but instead landed in Cuba. Lewis summarizes the three parts of morality in this way. Morality, then, seems to be concerned with three things. Firstly, with fair play and harmony between individuals. Secondly, what we might be called tidying up, or harmonizing the things inside each individual. Thirdly, with the general purpose of human life as a whole. What man was made for, what course the whole fleet ought to be on, what tune the conductor of the band wants it to play. And this brings us to why this is so important, how this applies to the way we talk about morality. Most people, Christians often included, only talk about the first part while forgetting the other two. This is why I so often hear people say, "It's not wrong as long as it doesn't hurt anyone around me." Or, "As long as everyone just respects other people around them, that's all that really matters." Notice both of these claims focus on the first part, but choose to ignore the second and the third. Or as Lewis puts it, this person is thinking it does not matter what his ship is like inside, as long as he doesn't run into the next ship, forgetting that for starters, the health of his own ship will in the end dictate how well he can avoid his fellow companions. Now the rub is this: as long as you stick to the first thing, there is very little disagreement about morality. Almost everyone at all times have agreed in theory that human beings ought to be honest and kind to each other. If this is as far as our conversation goes, then there isn't much for Christianity or religion to offer. But Lewis points out that we as Christians are called to keep going and to discuss parts 2 and 3. For what good is it going on about how we should all treat each other with respect if our ships are left in such a condition that they cannot be steered at all? Or to put it another way, what good is it saying that we should have peace and get along and be kind if in fact our greed, cowardice, ill tempers, and self-conceit continually prevent us from doing it? As Lewis summarizes, you cannot make men good by law, and without good men, you cannot have a good society. That is why we must go on to think of the second thing, of morality inside the individual. However, we can't stop here. We need to move on to the third part. Where are we going? And this is where different beliefs about the universe will lead to different understandings of correct behavior. Lewis describes the practical importance of the third part in this way. Remember that religion involves a series of statements about facts, which must be either true or false. If they are true, one set of conclusions will follow about the right sailing of the human fleet. If they are false, quite a different set. For example, let us go back to the man who says that a thing cannot be wrong unless it hurts some other human being. He quite understands that he must not damage the other ships in this convoy. But he honestly thinks that what he does to his own ship is simply his own business. But does it not make a great difference whether his ship is his own property or not? Does it not make a great difference whether I am, so to speak, the landlord of my own mind and body, or only a tenant, responsible to the real landlord? If somebody else made me for his own purposes, then I shall have a lot of duties which I should not have if I simply belonged to myself. Notice, again, how what you believe dictates what morality means. And this will dictate how you believe your own ship is supposed to operate. And this will in turn affect how successful the journey for the entire fleet will be. I can't overemphasize how much this stands against the common mainstream understanding of morality in the world around us, and how much this simplified understanding of morality, only focusing on the first part, has affected even the church itself. Lewis concludes the important chapter by summarizing the three parts of morality and setting the stage for the remainder of the book in this way. It seems then that if we are to think about morality, we must think of all three departments: relations between man and man, things inside each man, and relations between man and the power that made him. We can all cooperate in the first one. Disagreements begin with the second and become more serious with the third. It is dealing with the third that the main differences between Christian and non-Christian morality come out. For the rest of this book, I am going to assume the Christian point of view and look at the whole picture as it will be if Christianity is true. In chapter 2, Lewis looks at morality from another direction. by talking about the cardinal virtues. Now, historically, the church had the 7 virtues, which summarizes the core moral values of the church. These combined the 4 cardinal virtues, which we will cover today, and the remaining 3 theological virtues. The cardinal virtues are those recognized by all civilized people, whereas the 3 theological virtues, which will be covered later, are specific to Christianity. The cardinal virtues are given that name because they are pivotal to morality. They are prudence, temperance, justice, and fortitude. Prudence means practical common sense, or as Lewis puts it, taking the trouble to think out what you are doing and what is likely to come of it. Now, it's important for us to understand that this is something that we as Christians are called to do. We are called to be like children in having faith, but not to remain as children in intelligence. On the contrary, Christ tells us not only to be as harmless as doves, but as wise or as prudent as serpents. As Lewis says, God wants a child's heart, but a grown-up's head. And if you are thinking about becoming Christian, you are embarking on something which is going to take the whole of you, brain and all. See, Christianity tells us that our minds will naturally be sharpened as we travel the road of Christianity. Luckily, God doesn't accept us because we are prudent, but promises to sharpen us into prudent adults because he has accepted us. Temperance is normally understood with regards to drink and alcohol. And unfortunately, the world and often the church has simplified the virtue to just that. But temperance does not refer specifically to drink, but to all pleasures. And it does not mean abstaining, but going the right length and no further. The big takeaway for us is that temperance means not letting anything in life become too important. We should be disciplined in all aspects of life. Another important point that Lewis makes is that we must watch out for one of the common dangers of those who attempt temperance. He says that one of the marks of a certain type of bad man is that he cannot give up a thing for himself without wanting everyone else to give it up as well. We may all see fit to give up or limit certain things in our life, but as soon as we start enforcing that on others or looking down on others who don't, we've taken a seriously wrong turn. Justice can be understood as fairness. It includes honesty, give and take, truthfulness, keeping promises, etc., etc. And fortitude includes both kinds of courage, the kind that faces danger as well as the kind that sticks it under pain. Lewis says guts may be the nearest modern English term. He also says elsewhere that fortitude or courage is every other virtue at its testing point. If we don't have courage, we will continually fail at the rest. Now, the final takeaway that is important for us to understand about virtues is that there is a difference between a particular virtuous action and being a virtuous man or woman. The actions are meant to form the character. Lewis uses the example of a tennis player. Any person who picks up a tennis racket may hit a good shot from time to time, but it is the tennis pro whose muscle memory is such that it becomes his nature to hit a proper shot on a normal basis. This took time and practice, but eventually, tennis becomes a part of his nature. In the same way, this is what God looks for from us. We are supposed to practice at the virtues in order that they may form us into prudent, temperate, just, and courageous Christians. This is why right actions done for the wrong reasons, as we often saw with the Pharisees, are rejected by God, for they do not build the internal character called virtue. And it is this internal character that really matters. Lewis gives us 3 lessons on how morality engages the world around us. First, he points out that Jesus did not preach a new morality. In fact, every good moral teacher reminds more than he instructs. As Lewis puts it, the real job of every moral teacher is to keep on bringing us back, time after time, to the old, simple principles which we are all so anxious not to see, like bringing a horse back and back to the fence it has refused to jump, or bringing a child back and back to the bit in its lesson that it wants to shirk. Second, Christianity doesn't profess to have a detailed political program of its own. In other words, it's not as if there is socialism, capitalism, and Christianity, all offering their own programs for how a society should work. Rather, Christianity informs and shapes other things, such as the arts, sciences, and aspects of politics, Politics, of course, meaning things related to the city life. In the end, what we need are Christian scientists, Christian engineers, Christian artists, Christian movie producers, Christian judges. The job of the church is to shape the individuals, then the individuals shape the society. Now, Lewis moves on to touch on some aspects where Christianity gives us guidance on things we should take into account, such as the relentless call to charity, respecting those in authority, moral living, and using our skills for good, wholesome things, not just things that produce a profit. All these are good examples of how Christian morals should affect the way we as individuals live our lives, and in turn, the way our communities then operate. Once again, we let God shape us, and then God uses us as hands and feet to shape the social sphere around us. However, Lewis's final point is one of utmost importance. It's a sobering reminder and gut check, but one that we should all have at the forefront of our minds as we reflect on what the Bible teaches us and what our own personal views are. We should always beware of interpreting God's word through our lens, rather than letting God's word interpret us. Lewis says that if we were to actually encounter a true Christian society, one where everything from economics to family life to the arts and entertainment, they were all Christian, that each of us would like bits of it, but very few would like the whole thing. He goes on, that is just what one would expect if Christianity is the total plan for the human machine. We have all departed from the total plan in different ways, and each of us wants to make out that his own modification of the original plan is the plan itself. You will find this again and again about anything that is really Christian. Everyone is attracted by bits of it and wants to pick out those bits and leave the rest. That is why we do not get much further. And that is why people who are fighting for quite opposite things can both say they are fighting for Christianity. In other words, Lewis reflects that whenever we encounter true Christianity, it exposes where our presuppositions are. He admits at the end of the chapter that most readers probably think he went too far or not far enough on different aspects. This is because each of us are prone to mistaking our own opinions for the opinions of God. We'll finish today's lesson with Lewis's conclusion of chapter 3. Most of us are not really approaching this subject in order to find out what Christianity says. We are approaching it in the hope of finding support from Christianity for the views of our own party. We are looking for an ally where we are offered either a master or a judge. I am just the same. There are some bits in this section that I wanted to leave out, and that is why nothing whatever is going to come of such talks unless we go a much longer way around. A Christian society is not going to arrive until most of us really want it, and we are not going to want it until we become fully Christian. I may repeat, do as you would be done by till I am black in the face, but I cannot really carry it out till I love my neighbor as myself. And I cannot learn to love my neighbor as myself till I learn to love God. And I cannot learn to love God except by learning to obey him. And so, as I warned you, we are driven on to something more inward, driven on from social matters to religious matters, for the longest way round is the shortest way home.